Beautiful Sunday night. We are coming to you live from our Nile Serena studios. This is Perspective with Josephine Karungi.
A very good evening and thank you for joining us. We're coming to you live from the Kampala Serena Conference Center Nile Room. And tonight on the show, we'll be talking about the importance of marriage registration to women and succession laws. Thank you very much, my panel, for joining us and our studio audience that's with us today. Let me introduce my guests before we begin our conversation, and I'll start with Diana Isingoma, who is right next to me. Diana is a businesswoman. Thank you very much for agreeing to come and share your story with us today.
Thank you, Josephine.
All right. And then we have Mercy Grace Munduru, who is a human rights lawyer. She's currently working as a manager of programs at the Uganda Association of Women Lawyers, FIDA Uganda. Thank you very much, Mercy.
Thank you for having me, Josephine.
All right. And finally, Mr. Charles Nsimbi, who is a manager, civil registration at Uganda Registration Services Bureau. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Josephine.
All right. Well, let's say it as it is. When I put out the topic for this week, and it was importance of marriage registration to women and succession laws, the first thing somebody pointed out was there's a lot of registration that takes place in Uganda. So there's SIM card registration, there's ID, there's just so much. Why should we register marriages?
Thank you, Josephine. We have to register. Yes, there's a lot of registration. Indeed, there is a lot of registration. But you look at it, you're saying there is SIM card registration, phone registration, identity registration, voter registration. But what about the very person you vowed to live with till death do what? Part you. I mean, what is more important, the SIM card, the phone, or the person you stay with? So why do we register? Simply the same reason. For government to know that you actually are there, you are a Mr. and Mrs. It's good enough you know, and probably your church knows. But who else knows? And what happens when you are looking for government services as a Mr. and Mrs.? Who knows? It doesn't happen. Nobody knows that you're married. And what happens, as you said in this topic, when there's supposed to be succession, when one of you leaves, what is going to happen? The government doesn't know. And where do you go? We know that whenever we are dealing with a state, you're going to end up with the Administrator General, right? Well, Administrator General is government. Government has never known. So yeah, we need to register, one, just to get the identity that we are married, and government knows, and everybody knows, and it's a public fact. We need to register to get the benefits that accrue from that.
Okay.
Yeah?
I think, and I know this is one of your favorite topics, so
Absolutely.
I know you can go on and on and
Absolutely.
on. But then I thought it would be wise that we have somebody on the show who can actually, because you can talk until the cows come home, but if people are not buying it from you because you work there, they won't believe it. So, and that's why we're happy to have you, Isingoma, on the show. Isingoma lost her husband in 2015, January, and she agreed to come and share her story about what it was like for her after that period. Isingoma, what was your experience after going to find out what was taking place after your husband had passed?
Josephine, I want to tell you in the first instance, it wasn't easy for me because I couldn't believe that he has gone. I waited until a year passed. So later on I said I have to wake up and work on my successions as a widow. So in Jan 2016, I started my journey to process what was required so that I may get more. In that case, it was, the most important thing was NSSF funds. So what they asked first was the marriage certificate. Was I really married legally? So I had to look out for my marriage certificate.
Did you have it?
Yes. It was a requirement at the Administrator General's office because they wanted that info plus my children. So having presented it to them, they opened up my file, which was forwarded to the judge in Nakawa. So that's why I started having, they wanted a certified marriage certificate. So from there, that's when I started. I appeared before the judge to give the rightful information. He was asking me in relation to what he had on the file. So when he found that my marriage was authentic and all the info was right, he gave me the letter of administration. Because they advertised that death for 15, they gave me 14 days.
Okay.
So when there was no claim, any other claimant, they gave me a go-ahead.
How long did it take you from the moment you woke up and said, you know what, I need to start on this journey, up to when you managed to access the NSSF funds? In fact,
the whole process took me 1 month. I want to tell you, 1 month. Because the Administrator General, they gave me 14 days for the advert. It had to appear. So after having run the advert for 14 days and there was no any other claimant, they forwarded my file to the magistrate in Nakawa.
Okay. So
from there, the magistrate also, they gave me a week to go and check, and I appear again. I appeared to the magistrate twice. So he gave me the letter of no objection. Oh. From there, that letter, the letter of no objection and the certificate, those are the papers I took to NSSF. Okay. Then NSSF also gave me 14 days, 14 working days. And from there, I got a call in the bank that we've received such an amount of money. We need to know where it has come from. So they couldn't expect it, so I had to go back to NSSF to give me a clearance. From there, I got a clearance. And in that process, I want to tell you, I just parted with 100,000 shillings only. Okay, plus transport to and from. Yes. Okay. So I'm wondering about the period of 1 year that you spent before actually going. Is time a factor in this?
No, it wouldn't be. What is important is that at whichever time you are ready and you have the documentation, as she has said, you have the certified certificate, you will be able to process. Okay. Even if it took 20 years, if it took you 20 years to think it through, it would still be valid.
Okay. Mercy, you work at FIDA, and that means you come into contact with a lot of women. Yes. What are the loudest cases that come out for you in relation to succession?
What Charles has just explained about, registration of marriages is from a theoretical point of view, but I come from a very practical point of view. Unfortunately for us at FIDA, by the time we interface with women and girls, sometimes it's when there's been a rights violation or when they've reached a point where they've, hit a ditch and they cannot, go any further. So most of the women that come to us, indeed, we have widows, and these are people who probably were in cohabiting relationships, so they did not have, properly registered marriages, and now they have lost, the person that they were living with, and the relatives sometimes have come to take away the property from them and the children, and so they come to us for protection. And also sometimes, even if it's not just about death of the significant other, it's also, we have a lot of cases of, like when the marriage comes to an end, for example. Yes. Even when both parties are still alive, the question of property is very fundamental when people drift apart, especially people who have been living together. So in most cases, we are caught between the rock and a hard place where the marriage has not been registered. It's easier for cases like for Olive here, where they had an authentic marriage and it's been certified. You just pretty much run through the procedure and you get it within a short time. But then where there's no marriage, that is where the problem starts. So that's for widows. But then also for people who have been separated, when we are trying to prove the case to get property for the woman and the children, or to claim their rights within this marriage, we get into a very hard situation. First of all, to prove the marriage, but also to prove their contribution in the marriage, because they're very strict about what kind of contribution this person made. So we go into so much. First of all, proving if this marriage was there. Yeah. And then secondly, is this woman entitled to this property?
So it all begins with a certificate.
It starts from there.
What of the rights of the children? Who protects the children in this equation?
Thank you, Josephine. Who protects the children?
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to whose children they are. That's where you find that currently we have a lot of DNA cases at least appearing, because I like what Mercy has just said, because you see, whether it is succession or disposal of property is about when the person has passed on or even when they are just separated, it goes back to that certificate. Why? Because you cannot be a widow if you're not married. You cannot, you cannot divorce if you're not married. You have to first be married, and that's where the first question you ask Josephine is pertinent.
Why?
Why do we register? Because you're not married. You cannot even divorce. You cannot, you forget about when you've passed on, but you cannot even divorce and share. So the children will depend. Children are catered for in succession law. Yes. They are very well catered for. What the challenge which we know, and Mercy will help me here, what we know is that, well, if you have a scenario whereby you have one person, the spouse is registered and is married, okay? And then their children from the other woman, so to speak. The challenge will be that when she gets the letters of administration, she may actually take over the children, yeah, to look after them. Because you...
Take over the children. So the wife who is registered...
May
take over the children.
Yeah, if she asked for that, she would be in her place, because she actually is the person who is going to manage that estate. And you don't want to be the other woman and you have to depend on the wife.
Her kindness, really.
Yes, on her kindness, and in order to give you. So it might. So now that's where the quarrel and the circumstances come. So that's why it's so important that the children, you're asking how the children protected. Well, it would best be children are best in a situation where both parents are registered as married.
Okay, then that brings me to the other woman.
Yes.
What is her place in this equation? Because we can't run away from that now we have marriages and then we have other women on the side. Where is she?
There's a statement one time the president made when he was discussing something similar to this, and he said, you know what, you are just a girlfriend. So the other woman in the law does not exist. The laws do not envisage the other woman. I know the religions don't envisage the other woman, but the laws still do not. Marriage is governed by 4 major laws. You know, at least in Uganda we are so, how do you call it? We are so privileged that we can marry in so many different ways. You can marry customarily, which is what most of us do.
So these are the forms of marriage that are acceptable?
Yes.
Okay.
Which are legal,
yes.
Which make you legally a spouse, a Mr. and Mrs., which can be registered. You can marry customarily, yeah, which is what many of us do, though we think that it is a step towards marriage, but it is a marriage. That is kuhingira, the kwanjuras, the something. When we were in Wonyachi, they told us in Lango they have their own. Actually, in the north and the east, this is the most predominant form of marriage, the one they take most seriously. Even they don't believe you going to church when you have not paid the dowry and stuff. It's very important, but it is a real marriage. And if you register it, and its registration is so simple. After the ceremony, just go to the Gombora, which is the sub-county, with your 2 witnesses and evidence of that, and you'll get it registered.
That is the couple that has to go and register their marriage themselves. It has nothing to do with the church or anybody.
No. The couple with the 2 witnesses and evidence of that marriage, and you will be, the sub-county chief will actually issue with a certificate of customary marriage, which is as good a certificate of marriage as any other.
Okay.
So there is no reason why you wouldn't do that even in the minimum. The only drawback may be for the ladies, Josephine, is that this is potentially polygamous. Okay. In other words, I can kwanjura as many wives as I want and register all of them. But I can only stop at customary. I cannot proceed to the next level. So for the other marriages we have, of course, we have the Mohammedan, our brothers in the Islamic faith, which allows for. You see, there's so much room for you to get to marry and register that there is no reason why anybody should be in a relationship and doesn't have a certificate. We even have the law for the Hindu. The Hindu, we have Hindu temples here, and they actually have a law under which they can get married, and it is registered. And finally, we have, of course, the Marriage Act, which gives you 2 options. One, you walk into your RSB, with the one which is called DC, which is now the cow. You go to the Chief Administrative Officer. After 21 days notice, you get married and get a certificate. You come to URSB for the Kampala district, 21 days notice, you get married. So simple. We have them Monday to Friday during working hours, the simplest. You walk in with your 2 friends, you are 4 people, you, your spouse, and 2 friends, done. We've had them come in jeans, and moreover damaged jeans, and we still wear them. We don't but on the other hand, we actually have them in gowns. You saw our Valentine wedding, it was excellent. The Valentine's Day weddings, people dressed to the nines. Yes, we do have them at that rate. So for us, we don't discriminate. The government doesn't discriminate.
All right, Charles, well, I know that you're very passionate about this, so you can go on. But let's take a short break, and you can educate us more when we return. Welcome back. We're coming to you live from the Kampala Serena Conference Center, Nile Room, and we were talking about tattered jeans and marriage registration. I'm joking. All right, so one of the questions that has come in so far is, does this only favor women, marriage registration? Where do the men benefit? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. Where do the men benefit? I'm at that age where I'm thinking that my biggest achievement are my children.
Okay.
So who wouldn't want to ensure that your children, your legacy, and your property, and whatever you've worked for is catered for well? Which man would want the scenario we have had, and we've seen, Josephine, you are in the news media, so you know this stuff. So many big businesses simply collapse because you have passed away, and then they start dividing. The hotel goes to this one, the other house goes to the other one, and the tractors, which were construction, will go to the other person, and that's the end, the demise of all your business. I think this is the bane of African business.
Yeah.
Because we do not, we the men don't think, you know, Ford is still running, and the children are still benefiting. They had a streamlined system. I don't think Ford had the other woman who took away half the assembly plant at that time. That's what happens. Mercy would, I'm sure, I will educate us, that at the end of the day, your whole legacy, everything you've worked for in this world, is going to go down the drain simply because you did not register your marriage, and therefore the only most important person, the person who would cater for everybody, who would look out for everybody, is left hanging, and your brothers, your co-workers, your business partners come and pilfer everything you've worked for. So I think men have the biggest stake in this. You just and ensure that your legacy remains, your children are looked after well.
Is marriage registration just only about this? Is this the only plus that there is about
No,
it?
of course not.
Okay, you're going to tell me the other pluses, but Isengoma. Yes, you had a story you wanted to share.
Yeah, there is a colleague with whom we were working. The wife passed on, and the man remained. And in this case, the woman was getting much more money than the man. When she passed on, they were not legally married. The relatives of the wife came in to take everything from the man.
Did they succeed?
Yes.
They did?
Yes.
But if they were married, the man would rightfully...
There was no way he could defend himself. They were not legally married.
Yeah. It was a case of, but who are you?
Exactly. You may have had children for 20 years, what did the judge say? But that doesn't constitute a marriage.
And there are instances now, we're glad that with the progressive laws we have, women also can, write a will. And so that means even where it is a woman in this circumstance who passes away, she can, properly document how her property should be distributed. And under the law, there are percentages. And this is where the advantage comes. So usually 75% is for the children. And then where there's a marriage, 15% goes to the spouse. So it could be the woman or the man. And then we have, if the person had dependents, they take 9%. And then 1% for the cultural hair. Okay. So that is where somebody dies and did not leave a will. So where somebody dies and didn't leave a will and didn't have children, the spouse is entitled to 50%. The 49% for the dependents and 1% for the cultural heir. Okay. So when you're a spouse, automatically you're catered for, you're covered. And where you're not recognized, then your children will be the next beneficiaries, not yourself. So that is where the challenge usually comes. And in any case, the person, if you didn't have, you know, if you didn't have a recognized marriage, it's always a challenge. Of course, it's not in all instances that you fail, but then it's going to be a huge challenge trying to prove that there was actually a subsisting marriage.
Right. Yeah. So we had a couple of questions, and I'll very quickly take yours.
Yes, thanks, Josephine.
Okay. My
name is Sanyorad. I would like to ask, my question is like, for example, we're a couple, we work hard, we make money, then all of a sudden, we separate and we had children. So what happens next? Or who can be responsible for the children? Yet all the properties are being taken by the relatives. For example, a husband dies, then
or a boyfriend in this case, because you're not married.
Yes.
Okay. Charles, do you want to take that?
Well, there are two ways you can solve that. One, when you're doing your business, I believe you can give the percentages that you are directors and she has so much and whatever, and it will treat you just like business partners, which actually you are. You are business partners even if they are benefits, even if you are also partners with benefits, yeah? So, but on the other hand, you can leave a will. Mercy has done what, has expounded on that. You can leave a will, in which case this is a business and you have your shares in the business would be the ones you would be leaving to someone. And I think the law does not stop you from leaving your shares to your girlfriend, unless you have a registered what? Spouse. Because then that is where the challenge comes in, yeah? Yeah. You have a registered spouse and you are attempting to leave the shares in your business she most likely will challenge that will or go to court or something like that. Okay. So yeah, you have to be careful. But if you are just the partners in the business, you have benefits beyond the business, then yeah, you may either do it by the business in the articles of incorporation and you divide the shares, or you may write a will and decide to leave your shares to your partner.
Okay. Well, let's take the second question. I don't know, very quickly.
Yes, thank you, Josephine. I'm Sepija Fiona. In case a man lives here in Kampala and that man has a wife, they register from here. After the man goes to Kitugum, he gets someone else, they also register, because these companies are everywhere. Mm-hmm. Is there any solution at last when this man dies and all these two women come out? Is there any solution?
So is it possible, first of all, to register two women? Yeah,
it depends on the type of marriage. But I think the question she's really saying is actually the reason why, the other reason, the benefit of registration, which you were asking earlier. What are the benefits? Yes. You see, when you register your marriage, it goes into the national database of marriages, right? Yes. And therefore, no other marriage, if you are in a monogamous union, for instance, if you've gone to church or you've done the DC wedding and we've registered it, it is not possible, even if he went elsewhere, he will not be able to register that marriage. Even if he went to the DC of Kitgum, the DC of Kitgum may purportedly celebrate the marriage, but he would have to make returns. And when he makes the returns, we would find that that marriage is null and void. The Marriage Act is very clear. If you are in a monogamous, you are attempting to make a monogamous marriage, you must not have a subsisting marriage. And you do swear to that in an affidavit, which is attached to your marriage file. So you cannot, if you attempted, excuse me, that marriage would be null and void. As the lawyer say, ab initio, from the beginning, it would be null and void. Yeah? So you can go and attempt to do it, but actually even that happens to certain people. They celebrate a customary marriage somewhere. Later on in life, they become big people. They come to town, and then they have a wedding in church. They forget the other woman way back in the village, in Chandamkaka, where I come from. Yeah? Well, this other marriage, even if you have celebrated it, is null and void as long as the other marriage is subsisting. Okay,
well, before we take the next question, I've been thinking about it, and I'm thinking the only example you gave was NSSF. Is that the only place where the marriage certificate works? Did you go to maybe banks or wherever else to try and get this? And I will give, I was actually a bit surprised that it took only about a month. I think we fear processes and we assume it will take about a year running after something.
Yeah, not only NSSF, Josephine. I had to move to banks, and funny enough, I didn't know these banks. He had not told me about the banks. But as I was checking in the home, I could find a card, Standard Chartered. Then I say, oh, I have also to go there and what? And check. Then I get another one, Centenary Bank. I had to go there and also what?
Was it easy when you went to these banks?
Yes, it was easy because as I was leaving the magistrate's office, they told me that I should have as many papers certified. So it was easy for me because I had my paperwork certified.
And
so
paperwork meaning marriage registration?
Marriage
certificate?
Yeah, the certificate plus the letters of administration, LOC 1 letter, you people. LOC is very, very important. LOC 1 letter, the death certificate, those helped me a lot to move to those banks.
Did you find any trouble anywhere?
Not quite, apart from Standard Chartered Bank and maybe MTN. But for housing finance, it was fine.
What was the trouble? They're not going to come and beat you with a stick. Well, what exactly was the problem if you had all the documents?
They delayed me with their lawyer because they had to make a search. When I went there, they told me that I pay. There is a certain fee I had to pay for the search. So I had to pay money, then they gave to their lawyers to go to the magistrate's court to first prove.
Even with the documents you had?
Yes, they had to go there and make a search.
Okay.
Every bank, they do it. They had to do it, even housing finance. They had to make a search.
So they're just doing their due diligence?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But the Standard Chartered Bank delayed a bit. And that is the account I didn't know most.
Okay.
So, but later on, I was cleared. So the certificate didn't help me only in NSSF, but also everywhere.
Okay.
Everywhere.
All right. I'm glad things were not that
even where he was working, they had to clear me with the letter to show that he was their employee. That letter also I had to put it on.
Okay.
To back.
All right. Thank you very much, Singoma. Well, just before we continue, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. And you were still telling me, Charles, about how many people roughly you'd think that were either registered or not registered and are likely to face a situation.
Josephine, you've really had me there. That's statistics. Right now, we're supposed to do a survey to firm up these statistics. We haven't yet been able to do it, but we should be doing it later this month or early next month so that we have better statistics. But in a country of 40 million and about 18 million adults, you would think that you would have about 500,000 weddings a year if you use statistics purely.
But
now I know that we have a register which has about half of that. So, and that is all that is registered. It shows you the magnitude. If you have over the last 10 years of about 500,000, you have about 5 million couples. We don't even have 1 million registered.
You don't have 1 million couples registered?
No, we don't. That is how bad it is. That's why we have FIDA.
Half of the people we know are married. Okay, well, married.
I would even say worse. About 75 to 80% of the people married are not registered. Now, I have to put a caveat here. Non-registration of a marriage does not invalidate it. In other words, when you don't register your marriage, but you have celebrated it, say like in a church, which is licensed, that marriage is valid.
Okay.
The only thing you don't have is you don't have proof. It's like you sitting your O-level and you don't have the UNEB what? Slip. You sat, you passed, but you don't have the UNEB.
So can I go to UNEB afterwards and say, guys, I passed, can you give me?
Absolutely, so you can register your marriage anytime.
Okay.
Even tomorrow you can walk into our offices, as long as you have the papers from your church and it is licensed, we will register it.
Be very honest, is the process bureaucratic?
Absolutely not. All you need to do is to get the letter from your church where you got married, or your mosque. No, for the mosque it's from the Supreme Council or the Chibuli. And then you come over and you pay 35,000. End of story. You will have it. It's a while you wait service. Sit there in our office. We'll even give you a bottle of water and you're home and dry. By the time you get back on the streets, you have a fully registered marriage. But I must say, that must be when you have a legal marriage.
Okay.
If you got married in a church which doesn't have a license, As far as the law is concerned, that's not a marriage.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Marcy, do you have any figures that you can share with us from what you have at FIDA?
Well, I do contrast him. At least I know that there is a huge percentage, could be 60% of people who are living together and think they're actually married, but they're not married. So even the ones who are married then are not, they've not registered. Yeah. So sometimes when issues come up, you have the extra burden to prove. Unfortunately, where I sit, we deal with cases where there's already a rights violation. So that means a huge percentage of the women who come to us actually have been in these relationships believing they're married, but they're actually not married. So it's a very worrying issue, Josephine, and it also points to the fact that we already have gaps, you know, in our laws that do not protect people in such kinds of relationships. So it puts us in a position where we have the excess burden of proving, you know, the rights of these people within this marriage, or what they perceive as a marriage, which is actually not a marriage.
I'd like some examples of the gaps that we have in our law. But before we get that, Noah Sassia Patience is asking, do you consider the will for estate administration even if they were legally married, but maybe the husband doesn't trust the woman?
Can I pass the back?
Martin?
Well, definitely, if somebody dies and leaves a will, they list down how they want their property to be distributed. So whoever they feel can administer over the estate, it doesn't have to be their wife if that is not how they feel, but that does not take away the rights of, you know, the spouse and the other people under that will. It's in situations where maybe the person dies and has not left a will, that is where something maybe Charles didn't say is before somebody goes to obtain the letters of administration, there are usually processes where the family sits and they have a meeting and they, you know, agree on who is going to obtain these letters of administration in most of the circumstances that I've encountered especially. Okay. So that is where most of the decisions are made, and in these meetings usually, you know, the local leaders are part and parcel just to ensure that they're transparent in nature. And this is where most women get fleeced also because of the patriarchal nature of our society. People do not believe that a woman should be, you know, should be an administrator of the estate. So that is where women face the most challenge. So, but if the solution here is people need to learn and they need to accept and they have to learn to prepare wills beforehand so that you do not leave behind all of this mess that has to be, you know, gathered once you're gone. People must learn. We fear death, but it is inevitable. So for both women and men, if you own something, however little, you must organize yourself so that you do not leave vulnerable people behind. If you have children, you must document who are these children, where are they, and what are the entitlements within your property. But of course, the right of who you want to live in charge of your property is dependent on you. Yeah. And
I'm very glad we're having this conversation. Like you said, we fear death, but it is inevitable, and we must talk about these things and address them. Yes, your question very quickly.
Thank you, Ms. Josephine. My question goes to, you know, my question is there a point of validity if it happens to duration of the certificate? If I happen to, like, let's say I get married to this girl here because due to the increasing numbers of slayers, or let's call them gold diggers, she comes to me because I have some money, then we're going to marriage. The following day she says I want to step out. Is there duration of validity of the certificate I get from you?
Okay, she doesn't seem to agree about the marriage, but okay, let's answer the question.
The marriages which we celebrate, whether they are civil, church, they are for life. However, the courts of law can separate and give orders, which is known as a divorce. And since the Mifumi judgment, the only way you can do a divorce in customary marriage is also now via court, because originally you could take back dowry, but you remember that was struck out. So yeah, the only way you get the validity where you're talking about the marriage is for perpetuity until death do you apart. Unless, okay, we say death and court. Court can do you apart, but otherwise they are for life.
All right, yes?
Thank you. John Kashai is my name. God willing, I'm married to this man from UK, a foreigner. We've registered our marriage in your office, Uganda. So what happens, remember we have property in Uganda and also in UK. So if this man has died, so what happens to the property in UK? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. When you get married, our jurisdiction is Uganda. So your marriage would have to be in Uganda for us to have jurisdiction over it. And before a foreigner is married in Uganda, they must produce what is known as a certificate of no impediment. In other words, that they don't have a subsisting marriage where what? Back home. Now, in some jurisdictions, like Rwanda and Burundi, you can choose that you are going to get married with property or without property. In Uganda, we don't have that choice. When you get married with whatever you have, and you become one, so to speak. So what happens is, again, it will go back to what Mercy said. It will be what the will he left, okay? And I might put a caveat here again. You know that you can contest a will, yeah? So I'm thinking if I was a wife and my husband died and left a will saying his brother is going to manage the estate, when I'm a wife, I would definitely contest that will. And what would give you the gumption, the energy and the wherewithal to be able to contest is the marriage certificate. So in the case of the property in Uganda, and he would leave a will, hopefully. If he hasn't, interstate, you would have to go through all the administrator general, the family sitting, and you'd have the family from UK and everybody sitting and agreeing. But if you have your registered marriage certificate, you would be able to contest in case he decided to fleece you, even in death. Yeah?
Okay. And in that regard, as we close, because I'm going to ask you to make your closing remarks. So we've seen this in the papers and you know, abroad mostly, where people leave all their property to the dog or to the... Does this... don't laugh, it happens. Does this apply?
In this country?
Yes, in this country.
Well, I don't think we have very many rich people with dogs, but I've not, at least I've not seen that happen, but I don't know. As far as marriage is concerned, once you're married, the property is between yourselves. And as Mercy said, there are ways, and I didn't hear anything about a cat in that unless they have, you know, they are the 15%, the ones,
so
and it doesn't really seem to apply.
All right, Mercy. So the gaps, Mercy, as we close? As you close
one of the biggest gaps in our law is that, you know, where you're not in a legally registered marriage, usually the parties to this marriage do not enjoy the same rights as the rights of people who are married, especially with regard to property. And I must say, we've dwelt so much on when a person dies, but people do divorce, people do separate, and the realities of these issues play most prominently when people divorce or separate. So usually these people who have been living together, if a man goes and says that, you know, I did not actually marry this woman, it becomes a challenge. One of the cases that was very prominent and was decided was the case of Olive Chigongo. These are two prominent people that we've all, we assumed were married until the case. And the Haji said, no, I was not married. And when he said he was not married to her, the court had to go through a process of proving whether or not there was actually a marriage. And at the end of the day, court said there was actually no marriage. However, there was exception in her case because they'd been together for over 26 years. The courts had to apply, you know, the principles of equity to ensure that she was entitled to the properties that were being contested. So usually people rely on this to say that I am not married to her or to him, so this may not be matrimonial property, we cannot share this property. And so that is why the Marriage and Divorce Bill, a very much contested one.
And I was going to ask about that.
Given specific provisions with regard to property, that if people have lived together for some time, they must have contributed in one way or the other to, you know, properties together. So it's only unfair that they get thrown out on the street with nothing. So there must be certain rules that would ensure that these women and men get at least something out of these relationships. Unfortunately, the bill as it is now struck out that particular provision because people contested it. So even as lawyers now, we're left empty-handed. But thankfully, we have cases like the one for Olive Chigongo that sets a precedence for us when we run to the courts of law for us to be able to prove. And so that I would say to the viewers that people who are in relationships that they know are not legally binding, you must ensure that you document every transaction because you do not know.
And by transaction, you mean?
Yeah, your contribution, you must have proof that you contributed to this.
So
property.
Give me an example of a contribution.
I will say, for example, if you're building or if you're acquiring a piece of land, make sure your name is on those documents. Make sure that you have a lawyer or somebody help you review documents before you put your signature on anything. Make sure you know what you're signing to. Make sure that if you're, you know, contributing to anything jointly with the person you're living with, you have a copy of those documents. Because it could be that you may not separate, but one of you may die. And somebody will come and say, he sold me this house. and then you don't have any documentation to show that, in fact, this was your house. So you must document, because the law is not going to protect you since there is no provision in the law for you. So that is the privilege that married people enjoy, that people who are living in these relationships don't enjoy. And I must say, very many people as I speak now, both literate and illiterate, are living together, presuming that they're married when they're really not. So I would encourage people to embrace customary marriage also too. But our law gives us a very wide array of ways that, you know, you can get married. So you don't have to really have money to go to, you know, have a huge wedding or whatever. But whichever way you can, make sure you legalize that union that you're having, so that in case of issues that we've talked about, like today, you're protected.
Okay, thank you very much, Mazi. So, quick question.
Yes.
If, and you gave me this question without knowing it. So you said at some point you didn't know he had an account in one of the banks. So if, for example, he is doing transactions behind your back, you don't know really about this, you don't know about this land he bought, like we'd spoken about earlier, there's the other woman in the picture and he has built her house or bought her a car, but then all of this is in his names. What happens?
Well, it goes back. Your only evidence, your only power as a spouse is in that document, they signed the registered marriage certificate. All this property, even if you know about it, you can't do anything about it if you don't have that document, okay? So I'll pick from where she has actually given you all the benefits of registering a marriage. Unless you are willing to sit in this relationship and keep all the receipts for the tomatoes, for the bananas, for the kabalangara and everything, until just in the off chance that he might drop dead, and then you have to, you know, to prove that you contribute. Because you see, you may buy food at home. You may agree that for me I will deal with the domestic things, while for you do the building and the buying the plot. But you will not be able to prove that you contributed to that plot unless you have all the receipts for the tomatoes from Mama Kachara and all these other people. So it is imperative that why are you living in this relationship?
And yet for a married person, when they divorce, now what he has said, if, for example, we are contesting about property, and my husband says that I did not contribute financially to this house, there are very many cases where court has actually said my contribution does not have to be financial. My contribution can be indirectly, buying children clothes, buying food at home, doing these other domestic work, what we call unpaid care work. So by virtue of that contribution, you're entitled to that property as a married person. That is something that does not accrue to somebody who is not a spouse, a legally recognized spouse.
All right. Ms. Ngoma, I would like to hear from you your final thoughts for us.
Maybe I'm just giving this. Let men be open to their wives.
And vice versa.
Because many times, as you know, in Uganda, women outlive men. So men should be so open to their wives. When the man dies, the first person they ask is a woman. Like me, they called me to tell the people what has killed him. You get? They will not ask any other person first, but you, the wife. What has killed this man? Who are these things? So, me, I'm urging men to be so open to their wives, and also wives to be open to their men. But this is done by men who usually hide things from their wives, and nobody will look after your children when you've gone away than your wife. Yes. So this is my advice to men, that you should always be open to your wives. When you live and you say that you will be with one wife, I think you have what? Chosen. And you have seen hope in that wife. So there is no way of saying you are hiding things, you are putting them in your brother's names. This brother of yours, when you disappear, he will also disappear with your property. But the wife will be there for your children.
All right.
So that is my advice.
Very quickly, Giles.
Thank you, Josephine. Some few other benefits for you and us here, the corporate. You know all this insurance business, medical insurance and everything. Well, now we are talking with insurance. You're not going to be able to do that unless you have a registered certificate. But of course, for us, we are the same people who travel a lot. And we see a lot of people coming to our place trying to get visas, and on the ground that they are spouses. And they can't do that unless you have a registered what? These people, for us, we're not like the bank she mentioned where they have to do diligence by walking to the other. For us, the embassies simply scan what you present and send to email to us, and we verify. And it is free of charge for us to verify for the embassies. So if you think of traveling with your spouses and stuff like that for holidays in Dubai and Malaysia and wherever, well, you better have this registered, you know. And of course, the bank, she talked about the bank. The bank accounts, if you are thinking about banking.
Mobile money?
Yeah, even if you're going to claim, when she talked about MTN, if you're going to claim that money which he had on that account, on his mobile money account, and the chances are that you don't know the password, most likely. Me, my wife does know my password, but the chances that you don't know. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to prove. So the benefits are enormous. They simply go back to the fact that for you to say you are married and you won, you must have the Registrar General's
You must have the proof.
Stamp, yes.
All right. You wanted to say something just very quickly. I have 20 seconds. Or has it slipped your mind? All right.
Yeah.
Masi?
Finally, I just would like to ask that this night our viewers should ask themselves, what kind of relationship am I in? Think about it. Think about your children. Think about your future. Review and speak and think about the steps that you want to take to make sure you legalize it. Or even if you choose not to legalize it, make sure that you've organized yourself for if such things happen. But of course, as FIDA, we're there where there have been rights violations. If you know people who are in situations like this, we're happy to help.
All right, and for that, Kalungi, I'll be charging you. Yes.
What I was saying to ladies, that a marriage certificate, don't play around with it. It is a tool that will help you when things go bad. It's a very big tool. Get it, preserve it well. It will help you, because it helped me.
Right. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. And thank you to our studio audience. And that brings us to the end of this show. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition with Sheila and Huche.